Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to do block number 3 for the Sew Becca Sampler. Before we dive into the content, I just want to take a couple of minutes to level set what you're going to see in this video. So my intention for the Sew Becca Sampler was to create videos that showed in real time how to sew blocks together and to upload them frequently enough so that it would help take your mind off all of this coronavirus stuff. As some of you may know, I've done all of my filming, photography, and everything on my iPhone 11, and that camera is great. It does great quality filming, but I don't edit there. I edit on my Mac. And so once I'm done recording my video, I've got to move the files over to my Mac so that I can edit it and get it uploaded. That's never been a problem before, but for the past week, I have not been able to get photos and videos that I recorded on my iPhone 11 to download onto my Mac. And I have tried cords, I have tried Wi-Fi, I have tried emailing them, I've tried putting them in the cloud and downloading them, I have tried Bluetooth, I have tried AirDrop, I have tried every possible thing I know. I've even made sure that I have updates installed on my Mac, updates installed on my iPhone, and quite honestly, I've even taken my iPhone and restored it back to factory settings, thinking that there's something wrong on my iPhone. What ends up happening is when I get the video that I want to share, I hit the button to share it, to export it wherever I need it to go, and this little spinning circle comes up that says downloading, and it crawls. Literally, I am still trying to download one 5-minute video on my iPhone so that I can move it over to my Mac, and it is about a quarter of the way through. I can see the screen from here, and that is unacceptable because it has been working for about 30 minutes. This is a process that normally takes me just a matter of seconds. So I've had to face reality. I'm probably not going to be able to get those videos off of my phone. I don't know what else to do, and I want to get this video out to you. So that's why I'm taking just a minute to talk to you, because what you're going to see in this video is going to be a little different. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do things completely in real time, but I want to give you the instructions to sew this block together. The block we're going to make this time around is actually pretty easy, so I'm thankful for that. It is called Homeward Bound, and it looks like this. This block features only 2 fabrics, as you can see. I've got a color and my background. The white is my background, and I got the blue from my pop of color. It's just 4 half square triangles sewn together into a 4-patch. Simple, simple, simple. The whole idea of this block is the orientation of those half square triangles is what gives it that Homeward Bound feel. If you're following along in your book, this is pattern number 47. So what I'm going to do is get the book out and let's walk through step by step what you're going to need to do to cut, and then I'll walk you through the sewing instructions. All right, so our pattern is called Homeward Bound, and this is really, really simple. We're just going to take a cut of our background and a cut of our color and make 4 half square triangle units and then sew them together in a 4-patch. The thing that I really like about this block is when it's put together correctly, you kind of get this yin and yang feel going on, because you get your background embedded over here in what would otherwise be a half square triangle of color, and you get a little poke of color in this area of what would normally be just a half square triangle of your background. So altogether, it's going to have this really neat look. I have been finding that the cutting instructions in this book are yielding blocks that are just a hair too small. So the book will tell you to cut 2 squares at 6 7/8 of an inch, and then cut each of those squares on the diagonal so that you have 4 triangles for that fabric. You're going to do that both for your pop of color as well as your background. Now, because the 6 7/8 for me has not been working out well, I actually ended up cutting my squares at 7 inches and then cutting on the diagonal, but I found that was even a little shy of the size I needed it to be. So I would recommend cutting your blocks at 7 1/4 inches squared and then cutting on the diagonal. The worst case scenario here is that when you sew your half square triangles together, they might be a little too big. You need your half square triangles to be 6 1/2 inches in order for this block to reach 12 1/2 inches unfinished. So if you cut at 7 1/4 inch for your square and you cut it on the diagonal and put them together into a half square triangle unit. If it's bigger than 6.5 inches, you can always just trim it down. So that's really all the cutting instructions here. You're going to cut your 2 squares of your background, your 2 squares of your color, and cut all 4 of those squares on the diagonal. And what you'll end up with are 8 triangles, 4 of your color and 4 of your background. All right, guys, so this is where things are going to get a little different. I want to give you all of the cutting and sewing instructions in a real-time video so that we can sew this together. That was the whole point of the Sew Becca Sampler. But I don't want to use the fabric that I'm using for my quilt top because I want to save that for the finished quilt. So what I'm going to do instead is use some scrap fabric. I've got some good sized scraps from my scrap bin. I'm going to pull it out. That's what I'm going to use for the purposes of walking you through cutting, pressing, and sewing your block together. Just know that what I'm sewing here isn't my finished block. You've already seen what my finished block looks like. You're probably never going to see this block again. It's going to be a scrap block that'll go in my scrap block box to be put together with some other scrap blocks into a scrap block project. How many times can I say the word scrap block? All right, so let's angle the camera down and I'll show you how to cut your fabric. I'm not going to make this 2 size, which means I'm not going to cut the same size that you're cutting. So ignore the measurements on my ruler. I want you to cut your blocks at 7.25 inches and then cut them on the diagonal. I'm going to cut them differently because this is not big enough to get a 7.25 inch by 7.25 inch square. So here's my background, if you will. And I know that this has got 5 inches on it, so I'm going to measure mine at 5 inches, but you are measuring yours at 7.25. So all I'm going to do is lay down my background fabric so that it's folded, because when I cut it, then I'm going to get 2 cuts. I'm going to make sure that I know where the selvage edge is so that I don't include that in my measurement. And I'm going to basically find the line on the ruler that I want to measure at. My selvage edge is over here, so I'm just going to bring this in about a 1/2 inch or an inch or so that I don't get that selvage edge in my cut. And then I'm going to look for my measurement along the bottom, make sure there's fabric poking out from under there. And I'm just going to take my ruler and cut along the right side and then cut along the top. And that's going to give me a perfect 90-degree angle right up here. So that'll let me take this and turn it around. And now I can line this up in the bottom left-hand corner of that measurement. So for me, I'm looking for the 5-inch line on my ruler and the 5-inch line over here on my ruler. You should be looking for the 7.25 inch line on your ruler. And I'm just going to clean this up by cutting along the right-hand side and then across the top. And that gives me 2 perfectly squared 5-inch pieces of fabric. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the background fabric. So I have the cut edges over here. I'm just going to work with that. I'll pull this out a little bit. And basically, just slice right through. And we're going to clean this up. Oops, and if you see that this doesn't come all the way through, just go back in with your rotary cutter and give it another cut. Now I have all 4 of my squares. I'm not done yet. I got to cut them on the diagonal. So I'm going to scratch all 4 of them in a stack together so that all 4 corners are nice and lined up. You can do this individually if you want to, but I'm all about shortcuts. So once I have it lined up there, then I'm just going to take a ruler. Any ruler will do as long as it spans from corner to corner, and I'm going to lay my template directly on top of the fabric so that it's at each of those corners, and then I'm just going to take a rotary cutter and slice it on the diagonal. And now I've got 2 piles, each with 4 triangles in it, and what we're going to do is sew these into our block. So the beauty of this block actually comes when you lay it out, and basically what you're going to do is make a bunch of half-square triangle units where the color is always pointing in the same direction and the background is always pointing in the same direction. That's our block. It's that simple. So to make this even easier, we're just going to go to our machine and we're going to sew each of our background triangles to a color or a print triangle, and we're going to sew on that long seam. Don't sew on the short ones. You're going to want to sew on that long edge. The nice thing about sewing these together is it doesn't matter whether you sew with the background on top or the print on top. Your half square triangle is going to come out either way. So let's go sew these. All right, we're at my machine, and all I'm going to do is just orient all my triangles so that they're right sides touching, just like so. And then I'm going to put them into the machine, and I'm going to sew every set along this long edge at 1/4 inch. You'll want to be careful when you're feeding these in because these little triangles, if they're going in where your feed dogs are, have a tendency to go down into the little holes in your needle plate. So if you have a machine where you can adjust the needle over to the right a little bit, I would highly encourage you to push the needle position over to the right so that when you're feeding in the fabric, the edge of the fabric is going just off of the needle plate because I don't know, I just find if I don't do that, this little teeny tiny triangle goes down into my feed dogs, even if I sew with a leader. If you don't have the ability to reposition your needle, that's fine. Just sew very slowly and don't start right on that exact little triangle. Always take your first few stitches very slowly. That way, if something isn't going to go right, you have time to stop and fix it before you get a bird's nest or a rat's nest sewn into your fabric. All right, so now that we have all of our pairs sewn together, we're going to finger press to the dark side. So we're going to take each one of our pairs and lay it down so that my color is on top. We're going to put my finger in between the two layers, and we're just going to gently nudge the top fabric away, and we're just going to use our finger to gently press that into place. We're going to do that 4 times. Once you've taken the time to finger press all of your blocks, I find that I'll get a much flatter result in my end block if I take the time to just convince the fabric to lay in that direction with a hot iron. So all I do is just lay down my block and feel the seam with my hand to make sure it's going the direction I need it to. I pick up a hot iron and I press it onto my fabric. I don't move it, I just leave it sit there. And then I move it off. Do the same thing here. Okay, now that we have all of these ironed, we're just going to lay these out in a 4-patch orientation so that the color is going in the same direction on every one of these 4 half square triangle units. And we're going to sew these 2 together, these 2 together, and then we're going to sew the 2 rows together. And then we're done. When you're sewing these together, the tip that you have is you want to make sure that your seam looks a little bit like this. You should have color on one side and background on the other. And if you pop it open, what you should see is the 2 triangles of color are both pointing in the same direction. I'm checking to make sure that my colors are going both up and to the left. I could sew on either the left or the right side because the colors are going to go in the upper left either way. What I don't want to do is sew with the color to color or the background to background. I want to sew with the background and the color both touching. And it can be either one of them. It'll be fine either way. So basically your seams are going to make kind of like an X if you notice that. The seam on the one will go from the upper left down to the lower right, and on the other piece will go from the upper right down to the lower left. And it doesn't matter which one of those is on top versus the bottom. Once that's sewn together, you're going to want to take your 2 rows and clip them apart and make sure that you orient both rows so that, again, the color is always pointing to the upper left. So for me, it's going to look like this. And I'm trying to get it in frame. There you go. That's what it's going to look like. I've got my color pointing up to the left for all 4 of my squares. So I'm just going to press my seam on the bottom row to the right and I press my seam on the top row to the left. Sew these 2 rows together and my block will be complete. At that point we can iron it, or press it I should say, and then trim it down to size and we're good to go. One of the nice things that I really enjoy about my sewing space is having a cutting table and an ironing mat close by. I just keep a little iron with a little ironing mat and a little cutting mat right next to my sewing machine so that I can quickly sew, iron my blocks, and then trim them and cut them as needed without ever really leaving my sewing station. Now, my points are not exactly as perfect as I would like them to be on this block, but this isn't my true block, so I'm not going to care about it too much. But I just want to show you that if you don't take the time to really line up your points right here, you can either get a floating point, which is what I kind of have right here, or you can get a cut off point, which is what I have right here. If I would have taken the time to really pin this middle junction and make sure that the points were touching when I pinned it, I'd have perfect points for both of those. But I also want to show you that if I were to use this block, when it's sewn into a quilt top with a bunch of other blocks, and then it's quilted, and then it's washed, nobody's going to see this one little ½ inch of your quilt that doesn't look right. Instead, you're going to lose that, and you're going to see that you got a pattern going on here. That's what your eye is going to be drawn to. So don't fret too much over points that aren't perfect. Now, disclaimer, if you wanted to rip that out and redo it, I wouldn't hate you for it. But it's not necessary. Sometimes you do more damage to your fabric by ripping seams and getting it back together than it's worth to get those perfect points. All right. Now let's just talk about squaring our block up. In this case, your block should measure at 12.5 inches squared, and mine will not because I didn't work with it, but mine should measure at 8.5 inches squared. And so what I'm going to do is just take my ruler, find the line that I want it to be width and lengthwise, and make sure that the 45 diagonal line on my ruler is going corner to corner and straight through the middle. And that's going to make sure that my pattern is nice and square. And I'm also going to look at all of my little half square triangles around the outside and make sure that those are about 1/4 inch away from where they should be. Everything looks good. So once we have our ruler in a position to square things up, we're going to cut along the left, cut along the top. That'll give us a nice 90-degree corner to trim from. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find the 8.5-inch line on both the left and the bottom. Make sure that our 45 diagonal is going corner to corner through the middle. And then we're going to trim the left and trim the top. Now, I sewed with almost 1/8 of an inch, so I had a lot that I had to trim off of, but I would rather have a block that in the end is too big and needs a lot of trimming than a block that is too small and I can't quite get it to be the size it needs to be. So that's our tutorial. This is my little teeny tiny practice block for Homeward Bound. This is my much bigger block with much better points that I am super proud about. This is the one that I will be using in my quilt top, and this one I'm just going to put in my scrap block pile. Maybe there will be a project that I'll need a block that size for in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed sewing Homeward Bound with me. This is a sampler quilt that is going to have 12 blocks. It will finish at 12 inches a piece, and after we're done putting our borders and our sashing into the block, we're going to have a nice size throw quilt that'll help us remember the time that we got to spend together while we were all stuck inside and forced to quilt and sew because of the coronavirus. If you haven't done blocks 1 and 2, I encourage you to check out the playlist and get caught up with us before we post block number 4. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you're notified when I do upload future videos. I'll see you guys all in my next video. Bye!